information that we share today is from our own personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions as it may pertain to your condition.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Wolfen Chair in Digital Health. The Can Do study, a Canada-Netherlands network in precision medicine in childhood arthritis and rheumatic disease, will allow doctors and families to quickly know who needs biologics, which biologics works best for their individual child, and when can the biologic be safely stopped.
Canadian and Dutch physician researchers formed an alliance, Can Do, together with patient and industry representatives and policymakers to develop the first genomics-based, low-cost biomarker blood test to rapidly identify the best treatment for each individual child, completely transforming the care of childhood arthritis. More about how they want to achieve this will be featured in future episodes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Take a Pain Check. We're super excited to have another podcast host here today. As a guest, Cheryl Crow. Did I say that right? Cheryl Crow?
Yeah, crow like the bird. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cheryl Crow is an occupational therapist from Washington who's lived with rheumatoid arthritis for 18 years. In 2019, Cheryl started Arthritis Life to help others thrive despite their arthritis. She facilitates online courses and support groups to help people adjust to their conditions and live full and meaningful lives. Most days, you can find Cheryl creating life hack videos and spreading the word about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. So hi, Cheryl. We're really happy to have you on with us today. Could you kind of start off by introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So yes, everything you just said was correct. Yeah, I am from the Pacific Northwest, and I was a very active child and kid. I did a lot of soccer and sports until my diagnosis, and that kind of threw me off for a little while. But yeah, some of my favorite hobbies and things I love to do are swing dancing when my joints are okay enough to do it. And I'm going to train my dog to be a therapy dog. And like you said, making a lot of life hack videos and kind of educating other people about arthritis, because one of my little soapboxes is that people don't get enough like formal education and resources after they're diagnosed.
Yeah, what is swing dancing?
Swing dancing? Yeah. It's actually one of the few American forms of dance that originated in Harlem, New York in the 1920s. And it's a form of jazz dancing, but it's partner dancing. I do a kind called Lindy Hop, and it's fun. It was a really popular in the US from the 1920s to the 40s. Yeah.
Good to know. That's a good history type of lesson.
Yeah. It's not as popular with the young kids anymore, but we try. Yeah.
So what is your diagnosis?
Oh, yes. So I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis right after my 21st birthday. So yeah, rheumatoid arthritis. And I also did get diagnoses of gastroparesis around the same time. And then, which is like gastroparesis means paralyzed GI tract, or basically the little contractions that move food down your esophagus and through your whole system. Those contractions either don't work at all, like they're fully paralyzed, or they're really, really slow. So mine was a case of really, really slow. They still worked. Like I didn't need a feeding tube or anything, but it was just really slow digestion, which led to like early fullness and unintended weight loss. So I had that plus rheumatoid arthritis. And then I eventually got diagnosed with like generalized anxiety disorder. And so I've gone to therapy for that. So those are the three. There's a couple other little ones like Raynaud's syndrome, which is the one that makes you lose circulation, in your fingers and toes. But those are the main diagnoses.
What joints are really affected for your arthritis? Because I know like all of us have different joints when we have arthritis. So
yeah, for me, it's always been the classical pattern that they teach doctors. So, and to some degree, my initial diagnosis, I only had one joint that hurt, which was really unusual. But it's been the distal joints, the tiny joints of my fingers and my toes and the ball of my foot. So the very first joint to hurt was the knuckle of my right hand. And it's usually bilateral for me, meaning both sides hurt. If one hurts, the other one hurts, which is a big thing that differentiates rheumatoid from, like, let's say osteoarthritis or just an injury. Because if it's both sides, it's more likely to be systemic, right? Something like inflammatory. So yeah.
What symptoms, because you were only like 21 when you were diagnosed, what symptoms led you to consult a doctor?
Yeah. So, I had no idea what rheumatoid arthritis is. That was the last thought on my mind, actually, because at the time I had both these gastrointestinal, or I would just call them stomach issues. And I had stomach issues. I had severely dry eyes, which I didn't ever get a diagnosis of Sjogren's, but that can go along with rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah. And then I had one finger that I called my sprained finger, because I just thought I had sprained it, because I was really, again, I was very athletic. Like, I was running every day. I was playing college soccer. There were so many ways for me to accidentally hurt myself that I just assumed that I hurt myself, because it was only one finger. So, but I didn't even go to just one doctor. I thought all those were not related. But it turns out, if you actually look, just for the record, if people are listening to this, if you look at the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, yes, like the first one on the list is like bilateral distal joint inflammation, red, hot, tender, stiff joints in the morning, getting better with movement. It says fatigue, unintended weight loss of appetite. And those are all the things I had, but I just only had one joint that hurt. So that was what really delayed my diagnosis. But unfortunately, so I didn't like consult a doctor thinking I had rheumatoid arthritis. I went to a bunch of different doctors thinking I had a bunch of different unrelated things.
Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, you kind of started off with one finger, and now it's like your fingers and your toes. And I can totally relate to that. Like, mine started off as one finger, thought it was a sprain, very typical. And now it's fingers and wrist and like feet. So it definitely progresses, and you don't really know when it's going to progress. It just happens, and you're like, why is this one now swollen? Why is this one now red? It's just,
yeah, totally. And like, when I did get my diagnosis eventually, after a couple years of all these quote unquote unrelated symptoms, I woke up one day, and then every single joint in my fingers and wrists and elbows and toes all hurt. And then that's when I got my diagnosis.
I got diagnosed with actually just one swollen joint when I was younger, but I was also 11. And I was the same as you. I was a really active kid. And I had like just this really swollen knee, and it wouldn't go away. Like, you go to the doctor, and the doctor goes, oh, it's just growing pains. It's just whatever. Wouldn't go away. And then eventually, when he ran a blood panel, that was when we found out. But I only had one joint at that point. And actually, ever since then, it was my knee. My knee doesn't give me as much trouble as my hands do, or my shoulders.
That's so interesting.
So ironic.
Yeah.
So you said it took you a couple of years to get diagnosed. Did you experience any difficulties in the diagnosis process?
Yes, I did. Like many people, unfortunately, when you're a young woman, that there's a lot of research that shows that a lot of young women their pain isn't taken as seriously, and they're more likely to be accused of faking or being a hypochondriac. So yeah, I was told multiple times that they thought that you're not sick, you're just anxious, which my little soapbox for that is, why would you not be anxious if you go from being like super healthy and active? Like, I was the captain of my college soccer team as a junior. And then you suddenly, like, I lost 25 pounds, like mostly muscle. So I went from 130 to 105 pounds. Like, and I didn't want to. I wasn't like trying to lose weight. I couldn't eat, and my stomach wasn't working. And so I'm like, why I'm anxious about that, and they're like, well, I think your anxiety caused your stomach issues. I'm like, but I wasn't anxious before my stomach issues. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, but because it was a real conflict, because I was very, like, I trusted authority. So I really trusted the doctor. So I was like, wait a minute, do I trust myself, who I know my body, but these doctors have gone to school for 10 years and they're experts. So, I was also told you're a hypochondriac, like you're worrying too much about your symptoms. It was really, really hard. Like, looking back on it and going to therapy later, I didn't go to mental health therapy, until my son was a year old, and I went to it initially for postpartum anxiety and just difficulty kind of adjusting. And what we ended up talking about a lot is this experience, how traumatizing it was to me. I mean, and I don't want to use the word traumatizing lightly, but like when you start wasting away like that, like when you lose like a quarter of your body weight, I mean, I did feel like I was like dying. I was like, do I have some sort of cancer and no one can figure it out? But then to be told, but if you actually show how concerned you are, you're told that you're just being hysterical in a woman that's worrying too much. It was really, really, really frustrating. And so when I got my diagnosis, I felt relieved. Like I wasn't upset at all. Like literally not even 1% of me was upset. Like I was extremely relieved because I felt like she was validating my pain, validating what I had been through. And even just my gastroparesis diagnosis at least showed that there was something physical going on. And that gastroenterologist doctor even apologized. He did say because he had accused me of hiding an eating disorder. He told my parents he thought I had an eating disorder and that I was just hiding it. I was like, I'm literally telling you, like, I would rather be obese and feel okay than like waste away and be skinny, but like super unhealthy and feel like I'm dying. Anyway, so I still have feelings. I'm processing about that. So I finally, when I got that the day I woke up with all my joints hurting, when I got the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, I felt really relieved. But I think my relief kind of blinded me to actually understanding the seriousness of rheumatoid arthritis because the doctor was really optimistic. This was 2003. And she's like, these new meds, these biologics have come out. They're amazing. Like, we think that your prognosis is really good if you just get on these meds, early and aggressive treatment. And it did work really well for the first 5 years on my first medication. But then it became more complicated. Ever since then, in the last 13 years, my disease has been more up and down. And then I realized, oh, this is more serious than I thought.
Yeah. And before we kind of jump into what medications changed overall like, throughout the years, obviously your diagnosis process was very difficult and challenging. It definitely probably took a toll on your mental health. Like you mentioned, you were kind of traumatized and you felt like the world was ending in a way. How did you manage keeping your well-being, and also like how did you kind of implement taking care of your mental health?
Yeah, I will say that I wish I had gone to therapy, but I felt like at that time going to therapy would actually be proving to the doctors that I wasn't really sick, right? Because the doctors were like, you're not sick, you're just anxious, you need to go to therapy. But I was like, well, I don't want to go to therapy because that means that you guys aren't going to be, I felt that it meant, I know that's not what it actually means, but I felt that it meant that they weren't going to help me try to figure out what was really wrong. And that they were going to say, yeah, she's just a head case. She's just, and even so, everyone deserves ethical care, right? Even if you're quote unquote just anxious, anxiety is a serious condition. So, I was very resistant to therapy for a while, only because I felt like it was like a Band-Aid and not the main solution. But then, so I don't honestly know. I was very, I think honestly, the main thing I did at that time was just distraction, like distracted myself by trying to see friends or, but I can't remember actually doing anything like extremely helpful. Like, you know what I mean? Like but I wasn't doing anything unhelpful. It wasn't like I was, taking drugs or anything to try to take the pain away. I was just in survival. I would really say like, I was just in survival mode, just trying to survive every day and get through it. Having my family there to support and my friends, they believed me, which that was good. I think if my parents hadn't believed me, that would have been like a million times worse because they knew me, they knew my personality. They knew that I wasn't going to just out of nowhere fake that I was sick. There's nothing in my history that would suggest that would be realistic.
So you got diagnosed at 21. I'm turning 21 this year.
Wow.
But my question is, like considering that I'm very fresh in this age group.
Yeah.
Like at that point, you're the only one that's really having to deal with something like this. Your peers are not dealing with it. They're most likely partying or whatever. Mm-hmm. How did you kind of feel being in that situation? Because I know the way I feel towards it, but I've also had arthritis for a long time. You were newly diagnosed at 21. You kind of have to become an adult very quickly.
That's true. That's a great question. I think um again, looking back at my inborn personality, like my nickname on the soccer team was like mom, because like I was the one that I would go to the parties, but I wouldn't drink or do drugs or anything, because I was always actually very like kind of a I'll be honest, like more of like a control freak. Like I didn't like to drink alcohol because I didn't like feeling out of control of my mind. Like so in a weird way, like I know for a lot of people that changed, like in terms of, because I've been on methotrexate for 18 years, except for my pregnancy. So, that's, you're not supposed to drink on that. And that could be a big change for people in college. But since I already didn't drink, again, because I'm a control freak, I was like, the doctors weren't wrong about some parts of me being a little bit anxious, right? Because control is kind of an anxiety thing for a lot of people. But yeah, like as a young person, I think initially I was just so relieved that I just was like, it didn't affect my social relationships too much. I honestly have to say, and it's not to like scare you, but I think in your mid 20s to late 20s, when you start, for me at least, dating people and thinking about marriage and like settling down, that was when it became a little more like, okay, I need to like explain this to the people that I'm dating, and think about things like risk of like STDs if you're on a medication that suppresses your immune system, and like, advocating for myself for like partners to get checked for STDs, like sexually transmitted diseases, that kind of thing. Like, that was a little bit more challenging. The friendships, they were just, I mean, this is the thing. And then maybe you guys understand this, or maybe this is just me, but it's like, the fact that no one really understands what rheumatoid arthritis is, it kind of works in our favor sometimes and not in our favor in other times, right? Yeah. So the friends, like, they didn't really think it was that big of a deal. They thought she just takes these medicines now and she feels better, So but because the medication worked for me so quickly, like I went from like literally looking like I was going to die. Like, again, I was like emaciated, like a little skeleton, to like, I gained when I'm prednisone and Enbrel and methotrexate, and I gained all the weight back in like 2 months or 3 months. And I was like, woohoo, I feel amazing. So, but I think it was just very simple. It was very simple. It was like, I got sick, but now I'm feeling better, but now when I'm older and it's gotten harder because the disease has more effect on my life now.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like the disease has more effect on your life now, and now you have a husband and you have a child,
yeah,
a son who's about can you talk a little bit about your son, and then talk about how you kind of manage parenting, because obviously like you have to manage your disease. On top of that, you have to like worry about many other people in your house and make sure that they're okay too. So how does parenting work with your condition?
Yeah. And I know it's something a lot of people worry about. And so, my son is 7 years old. So I got pregnant in 2013 and gave birth to him in 2014. And, one thing that well-controlled rheumatoid arthritis on its own isn't considered a high-risk pregnancy. So a lot of people assume that because they have rheumatoid arthritis or ankylosing spondylitis or similar diseases, that their pregnancy will be considered high risk. But if it's controlled, like through medication or not, then it's actually not a high risk pregnancy in and of itself. So, I did the big question with pregnancy was, how am I going to manage my medications? Because I had to go off methotrexate, and there's a whole other thing about that. So, but I know your question was more about parenting. So yeah, the parenting part, it was hard because I did have the dreaded postpartum flare up. So I had a really big flare up postpartum, and I took a long time to recover from that, like to get back on. I ended up switching medications after like a year and a half or 2 years. But so it was hard to do all the little things to take care of him when he was a baby, right? When he needed, like, every minute you need to either be changing their diaper, feeding them. Everything that you do requires these tiny little hand movements, and if your hands are hurting, it's hard. So it was just, delegating, making the task as easy as possible, and then delegating it if I couldn't do it. And now that he's older, he understands, he understands what arthritis is in general, and he kind of will say, like, mommy needs to take lots of naps because she has arthritis, which is so funny because most people don't understand that arthritis can cause fatigue, the kind of arthritis we have. So, or he'll say, like, yeah, my mom has arthritis, so she can't do that. Like, we went to a Boy Scout camp, and, he understands. You asked, or you're going to ask about, like, how does he help me at all? Like, it's funny because I am a little bit like, I probably, like, since he's an only child too, like, I do a lot of my nature would be, oh, I'll just do it for him instead of like helping him be independent. You know what I mean? And I know that that's like a classic parenting thing. Like you want your child to actually not need you eventually, right? I want him to be an independent adult. So it actually has helped me support him in being independent. Like instead of me putting on his socks and shoes, can you do it? You know, that kind of thing.
The information that will be mentioned in the next segment in terms of pregnancy and methotrexate varies from person to person. Please make sure you consult your physician before you make any medical decisions. We have linked some articles down below in the description for you to read if you're interested in learning more about methotrexate and pregnancy. These articles were suggested and picked out by the Medical Advisory Board of Take a Pain Check.
Was it difficult getting pregnant?
Yeah, no, and I didn't even research that too much before, to be honest. Again, I'm a little bit of an optimist. And so that's why it was so out of character for me to be so like upset about my health before, right? Because I mean, that just wasn't how I was. I'm just kind of like, everything's going to be fine normally. So I didn't know that there was an issue with fertility. But again, if you're on rheumatoid arthritis not controlled well, like through medication or other means, you are more likely to have infertility. But no, and I got pregnant the first month we tried. And I was like so surprised because I was so used to my body, like not, you know what I mean? Like you're used to your body not functioning properly. And then I got pregnant. I was like, what? And the pregnancy was really easy. I felt great. I felt better than I felt in a long time. I mean, I did develop gestational diabetes, which is actually more like type 1 diabetes. It's like an autoimmune. It can be kind of like an autoimmune thing. So I didn't actually know that I was more likely to get that. So I was really bummed. But then I was able to manage it with just diet and exercise. I'm saying that because it's like so cliche, but it actually works. It worked really well for me for gestational diabetes. So, but other than that, and he was breech. So meaning his head and the baby's heads are supposed to be down and the pelvis to give a safe birth. But so because he was breech, it was a planned C-section. So that was a little bit longer to recover from than like a kind of uncomplicated vaginal birth would have been. But other than that, it was a really easy pregnancy. So yeah.
Because I know like I've been on methotrexate for almost 8 or 9 years now. And I've switched between injections and pills and whatnot, but I've always had it in the back of my mind that it might cause infertility. So I set myself up for, I guess, like, I'm okay with the fact that I might not be able to have my own kids.
Well, I don't think it causes infertility. It just causes birth defects.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect how likely you are to get pregnant. You can get pregnant, but the baby will have most likely birth defects, or it won't form properly, or you'll have a spontaneous, I think they call it like a spontaneous abortion or like a miscarriage. But no, it doesn't. My understanding is that it doesn't have, once it's out of your system, it doesn't, but maybe I'm wrong. Actually, we should fact check that.
Maybe we should fact check that. But I've always, like, from a very young age, I kind of understood that it could lead to me not being able to have my own kids, whether it be through birth defects or miscarriages or whatnot. Every relationship that I've been in, and, you know, I was only 17 in my first one. It was just very obvious. And I said, straight up, listen, like, I can't have my own kids. So if we do end up together in the future and you want your own kids, like, tell me now, because it's a lot easier to get it done with. But I kind of set myself up for that, so that no matter what, my partner always knew.
Well, that's the thing, is that, like, and this leads into like acceptance and commitment therapy, which we'll talk about more later, but it's like the idea that we can control our health is really like an illusion, right? Even for healthy people, like there's no, like, you can have two of the most healthy people, like 2 Olympic athletes can get married and they can have infertility. Like things can happen to anyone, but you're right. It's really smart to be as upfront as you can. Like initially, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have to be that way, but it's also like, you know, the idea that, oh, if you just didn't have rheumatoid arthritis or juvenile idiopathic arthritis, then you would definitely have no health problems ever. That's also not correct, you know? Like, and I have lots of friends who are more healthy objectively than me that have had infertility, you know, or challenges. So a good website is called Mother to Baby, just FYI. It's a nonprofit that has the latest up-to-date medicine safety information specifically for pregnancy and breastfeeding. So it's a really specialized website. And a lot of doctors, I'll tell you, because I'm, you know, talk to a lot of people on social media and stuff, a lot of doctors aren't up to date with the latest research in the last 5 years, even since my pregnancy. so many medications for rheumatoid arthritis, so many biologics are considered safe for pregnancy that weren't before, because they weren't considered safe, not because they were known to cause harm, but because there was just no data. So now they have the data. Like methotrexate causes harm, so that's definitely bad. But a lot of times these medicines that aren't considered safe, it's not because they know they cause harm, it's because they just don't know. Because no one wants to do research on a pregnant person, because you don't want to accidentally, hurt the baby. But interestingly, methotrexate can make men more likely to be infertile.
Yeah,
okay.
I read that.
Yeah, but I don't know about women. I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah.
So you mentioned like you got a type of diabetes from the whole pregnancy kind of like process and stuff. But you figured out how to kind of manage your symptoms by healthy eating and diet. And in one of your articles, you mentioned that you use VR to manage your pain. Can you kind of talk about how you manage your symptoms aside from medication? Like what do you add on to it, or like how do you kind of like cope with the pain?
Yeah. So I always try to think of things in like two little buckets. There's prevention, which, it's cliche, but an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, right? So I really try to focus on prevention, waiting until things get really bad. And then there's, coping, like you mentioned, coping and adjusting and adapting once the pain or the fatigue is there. So, and then in the buckets, my mind is always like categorizing things. So I also think of like mental tools, like brain tools. Those are like my mental tools, and my body tools, like the physical tools. So like tools for pain to prevent and to some degree address pain would be things like, I have a lot of life hack gadgets. I should have brought them out, but like, here's like a quick example. Like this is like a special salt and pepper grinder where instead of having to sit there and twist it, it's actually like I'll do it with the salt while it's coming here. It's electronic. So all you have to do is put it over. And then I have so many gadgets. So you guys know if you've seen any of my videos.
Yeah.
But, thinking about like a day. So this is kind of my occupational therapist training, but like thinking about a day in my life. How can I make each task I have to do easier to prevent joint strain and like stress on my hand joints, which then eventually will prevent pain, right? So if overusing your joints is not good if you have this kind of thing. So those are like the physical. And then of course, there's also the physical tools like pain relief. So things like non-medicinal pain relief would be things like, a hot pack, a cold pack, or like a warm shower when your joints are stiff, and like topical creams, like BioFreeze is one that I use. And then there's the mental tools I think are more complicated and they're more individual, right? What works for one person might not work for others. For me, I use, mindfulness based strategies. And when I mentioned earlier, acceptance and commitment therapy, that's like a mindfulness / behavior approach. So you think about connecting to the present moment, which is really unintuitive if you have pain. Like who wants to think about the present moment if your present moment is pain, right? Like all I want to do is think about the future when I don't have pain. So like, how do I make my future not have pain instead of let's just sit with the present moment? Like this was so unintuitive when my therapist first was telling me. I was like, why? What's wrong with you? Like, why do you think people should do this? But then I realized that like, it is actually really empowering not to be like, no pain, no gain, but like to sit there and be like, I can sit in this body and I can accept what it feels like just right now. Doesn't mean that I'm saying like, it's going to then be like this forever, right? I'm going to have pain forever. It's just like being present. Just, it's like, it's a very like, it's just an interesting mental experience. And for someone like me, who's so future focused, it's really been helpful. And then saying like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with right now. Like I've done my little pain techniques. I've done whatever I can and I still have pain. And then the next question is, okay, so that's instead of this like, anxious search for like, I have to find the next thing to make the pain better. I have to find the next strategy. Then you say, what can I still do even with this pain? Like, what can I still do that brings joy to my life or brings meaning to my life? And it's a different approach, but it's empowering in a way that I enjoy.
What a different way to look at it.
I know. And I would say, like, I think, again, I'm always like being a contrarian to my own thoughts, because I'm like, well, what would someone say who's really skeptical about this? Because I was skeptical at first too. It's like, well, I do think that it's much easier to do if you're in like mild to moderate pain than like severe.
Yeah.
Like if someone's in severe pain, like, of course, like pain is a signal to your brain that there's a threat, right? But the problem with chronic pain, that is in pain from like an ongoing chronic condition, is that sometimes we've done everything we can, and the threat, it isn't life threatening, even though our brains are like interpreting it as life threatening.
Yeah.
So, but if you're in severe pain that you can't even focus on like anything to do with mindfulness, that's a different scenario. But for me, most of the time I'm in like mild to moderate, pain, unless my disease has been super well controlled with medicine. So this is achievable for me. And it's a very like refreshing perspective. If your whole time in your illness, you've been just focusing on like, make the pain go away, do another tool, do another strategy. It's like, then the pain still controls you, right? And your pain is like versus like saying, I can actually still do a lot. I can still do some things and still have a meaningful day, let's say just today, and not give up hope that my pain might be better tomorrow, but seeing what's still possible now. It helps you get out of this vicious cycle where your whole life just becomes about controlling pain. And, that's not the most fulfilling life for most people.
Yeah. So we spoke about acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. So this is like a mindfulness approach in which you learn to notice and acknowledge your thoughts and then move on to living your life. So exactly what we were just talking about. How has this approach helped you?
Yeah. So it really, I joked, I was dragged kicking and screaming into acceptance because it felt to me like settling, right? Like, who are you to tell me that I have to just sit in with the present moment? I want to focus on like a better future, but what's helped me is like that ultimately, and I think the pandemic is a good example of this, like, you can have every plan you want to make for the future, but ultimately the future is unknown, right? You can make in February 2020, I had all these plans for the rest of 2020 and they all got waylaid. And so that's kind of how my therapist eventually convinced me to really lean into this, is that she's like, think about all the things, like with Charlie, with a baby, all the things you worry about when they're little, sudden infant death syndrome, or them choking, or this or that. I spent so much time worrying about so many things that never happened. So it's like, it's helped me, like, when I get into that cycle of worrying about the future, it's helped me say what's going on in the present moment. And then that's the acceptance part. And then the commitment part is saying, reminding yourself, like, what are your core values and what's important to you, and then moving towards that. So moving and behaving in a way that's according to your values, rather than again, Dr. Russ Harris, who wrote this book called The Happiness Trap. It's really, really good. It looks like just a random like pop psychology book, but it's about acceptance and commitment therapy. The whole thing is about that. And the happiness trap is this idea that we can avoid discomfort. And if we avoid discomfort, so the thought is that we can avoid discomfort, which is not true. We cannot. It contains suffering no matter what.
Yeah.
Right. And even like the most calm, like monk high on the mountains actually admits that, right? No one's life is free of suffering. And so then, but also the other happiness trap idea is that if we just avoid discomfort, we're going to be happy. And we have to just continuously control our thoughts and think positive and like only do happy things. And that's actually, that's the trap. The trap is that we can avoid, and we have to avoid discomfort and unhappy thoughts, when really, if we just accept them as part of life, and you don't have to like them, you don't have to fight with them. He calls it turning off the struggle switch. Like, so you're saying, like, I might have a thought that, like, what if this gets worse? Like, that's a valid thought. Like in cognitive behavior therapy, you'd be like, that's a distortion, because you don't know whether it's going to get worse or not, but it could get worse. Like, you can't argue your mind out of knowing that that's a reality. Like, your condition could always get worse.
So you really just like extended a lot on acceptance and commitment therapy, which is something that you obviously use in different forms of social media to kind of give lessons about different things that help you, as I've seen on your feed. Can you kind of give us a little bit of background on your whole podcast and your life hack videos and how you've kind of created this platform depending on like what you've learned throughout the years and everything. Like for example, you just showed us that salt technology.
Yeah.
I definitely need that. Like my kid can barely cut things. I told my mom, I was like, oh, I really need like an apple cutter, like a guacamole maker. Like I just need like a bunch of random gadgets because it's definitely a struggle in your hands to like, cut everything. But anyways, besides me talking about my problems, can you kind of give us a background on your platform and like podcast and what you're doing? Because it is great.
Oh, thank you. No, and I'm so impressed with what you two are doing, especially at like a younger age. Like I think that I wasn't as open about things when I was younger. I was a little more in denial. I was like, I just hate meds and I'm gonna be fine. Again, that optimism. But yeah, so in 2019, I formed Arthritis Life. In my mind, I thought it was going to be a talk show, like a YouTube channel that was actually like just videos of me interviewing people and talking about things to do with arthritis and sharing life hack videos, but like in these long interviews. So if you look at some of my older videos, I literally have like, a 6-minute video of me and my friend Sarah, who has rheumatoid arthritis, talking about her favorite bras and like which bras are easier to close and open. But then so I thought it would be like, okay, this will be like a YouTube channel. I didn't even think of podcasts, to be honest. And I'm just going to say this in case anyone else has this. I never liked the sound of like my own voice. Like a lot of people, like when you hear a voicemail, you're like, is that, whoa, do I sound like that? But so I was like, no, I come across a lot better on video than a podcast. And I go on too many long tangents that a podcast, it wouldn't sound good on. But then anyway, but podcast became so much more popular that then I evolved a lot. But, and then with short form video, like TikTok and Reels, I got really excited about that because I realized instead of sitting here and I have like a 9-minute video about like eye drop gadgets, because I still have struggle with dry eyes like to this day. And so, squeezing the eye drops when your thumbs are hurting and your hands are hurting can be really hard. And people with rheumatoid arthritis and even osteoarthritis can have a hand weakness. So I did these long videos and like no one wants to watch a 9-minute video about an eye drop gadget. Or a few people, like 130 people did, right? But then when TikTok came along and it's like, the challenge is like, can I get that same information across in 15 seconds, in 30 seconds? So, and then seeing people's responses that they were so excited about the life hacks, that's my initial vision and mission. My mission is still to, educate, empower, and support others with arthritis. And that's remained the same. But what's been really interesting is that with the education, I initially thought the life hacks were going to be like the hook that got people interested. And then I'm like, come for the life hacks, stay for the like mental support, right? Because that's the acceptance part, and the mental health is what I'm actually most passionate about and most excited about. But I became more excited about the life hacks when I saw the response, because like you said, Natasha, like a lot, these daily challenges, it's hardest, the younger you are, the harder mentally it is, right? Because you're like, I'm a young person and I have to use this gadget that I've only ever seen like elderly people using, right? Like not the apple slicer, but like, an adaptive gadget, like the jar opener or the key turners. And so I realized people were telling me like, it's nice to see like, and I'm almost 40, but a young for arthritis person, because, people still think arthritis is like for 80-year-olds only. So anyway, this is a long tangent, but, yeah, it's inspired me to continue making more of those kind of videos. Initially, again, I thought it would just be a few, to get people's interest, but now I've realized that it is something people really need. They need more help with those practical tasks.
Yeah. I think when we started the podcast, we looked at it as a way, we saw you out there, we saw a couple of other people out there, but there was no one that was actually like young, and so for us, it was a perspective thing. And it was like, well, our perspective, especially having it for almost 10 years, was very different. And when we were younger, we felt so isolated and so alone that when we thought about it, we're like, okay, like maybe it's time that we put something together that people don't feel isolated and alone. And we actually met through Cassie and Friends. And we were teen arthritis group leaders. And so we were supposed to make events and all that. But then COVID hit. And so events weren't there anymore. Yeah. And that was like, it's really hard to reach out on Zoom or on like online because kids either don't want to come, or it's a lot easier to flake on a Zoom meeting than on a real meeting.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so we were like, okay, maybe we should put together a resource, and we were just toying with some ideas, and the podcast kind of came about, and we're so happy to do it and to meet people like you and hear all these different perspectives.
Oh, so that's so great. I think it goes to show like the power of storytelling, like that we all want to hear stories of other people that have been through similar things. So we're not as alone. And they want to hear a lot of people who are like, again, I can remember a little bit what it was like to be 21, right? But it's not the same as being 21. And when I was 21, there was no social media. There was no smartphones. Like the world is really different 18 years later. Like literally Facebook was just being created at that time. And it was debuted, like I joined Facebook the next year, but like still, even with Facebook, no one was using it the way they do now. It was kind of like a random message board thing. So, the world, I think it's so important to get your voice out there. And I'm honored to be on your podcast. I think it's great because then, you're going to just keep going. And then by the time you're my age, you're going to have like 500 episodes you've done. It's going to be so cool. And then you can look back and be like, oh, there I was so young. No.
Yeah, hopefully we will have 500 episodes one day.
You've already got 20, so just keep going, same rate.
We've touched a lot of different topics, and a lot of people can take some advice out of it, but we want to know a specific piece of advice, like one life hack that you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit, again, of a contrarian here, but I often show gadgets, like little gadgets, right? For different, and I call them like life hack gadgets, but the most important life hack gadget I always say is like your own brain. So what I mean by that is not just like hacking your mindset and like changing your mindset for acceptance, although that is a really, really important thing, but also like, if you just have the mental attitude towards your daily tasks that they're almost like you're a detective. So the life hack is mentally being a detective about all your little tasks and thinking, how can I minimize the strain on my joints? So for example, I could hold this coffee mug like this. That's putting a lot of stress on my knuckles. And this was my very first joint to get hurt and it's still the one that tends to hurt more today. So, or I could hold it like this with all 4 fingers. That's a little better than 2, right? But it's still not as good as holding it with 2 full hands. Now, when I lift this up, I'm actually using like shoulder muscles. I'm not just using my hands. So the weight of this is being supported by my whole arm. So that's more like looking at your own approach to daily tasks in terms of helping your joints is going to help a lot more than like a gadget. Because as much as I love making videos about gadgets and stuff, I mean, the salt one is a good one because it's just replacing something you already have. Oops, now I'm holding it the wrong way. There we go. But most of these, a lot of times the gadgets just sit somewhere, you forget to use them. So I think your brain is the best like life hack tool.
Definitely agree. Yeah. You kind of understand your pain and you work around it and you learn how to work around it.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who's struggling to accept their pain?
Yeah. So I actually prepared this quote from Dr. Russ Harris because he says it so much better than I can, I think. But he says, acceptance doesn't mean you have to like your uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. And I would add there your uncomfortable physical sensations. It just means you stop struggling with them. Acceptance literally means taking what is offered. It doesn't mean giving up or admitting defeat. It doesn't mean just gritting your teeth and bearing it. It means fully opening yourself to your present reality, acknowledging how it is right here and now, and letting go of the struggle with life as it is in the moment. So I think one of the things I would try to say to maybe convince them to try, first of all, just try it. If it doesn't work, if it's not helpful to you, then it's not a helpful tool. That's okay. Like no one tool is universally like no one agrees on anything in the world, right? On the internet. Like, I mean, we all agree that, maybe like babies are cute. Maybe that's like the one thing we all agree on, but but also saying like, to me, another thing that is helpful is just saying like, to think that it might actually be empowering to say that I can connect to this. I can actually bring my attention to the pain. It's almost like we're so afraid of paying attention to the pain, right? Because we're like, we spend, I don't know if you guys are the same, but I've spent so much time trying to avoid my pain and dissociate from it and distract myself from it. But it's like, there's this quote from Tom Robbins, an author, not the same as Tony Robbins, but it's like, that which you hold holds you. Like, meaning like the more that you are focused on getting rid of the pain, the pain has power over you. But when you're able to actually connect to it and say that this is it, like I'm actually allowing myself to fully feel this, it's really weird, but it actually has less power over you, in my experience. Again, I can't speak to it happening to everyone, but I will say, just for the record, that there's evidence for ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, that is just as strong evidence as CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which is the more well-known approach. And not only it's as effective for chronic pain, and actually patients report they like it more. They find it more satisfying than cognitive behavior therapy. So that's why that's just not, it isn't, I'm saying that's what worked for me, and it might not work for you, but it is, I'm not the only one it worked for. So yeah, you can look that up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. It was great speaking to you. You know, you really learn a little bit more when someone was diagnosed around the age you're at, and you kind of learn from that perspective as well. We love your videos and your podcast, and we'd love to just keep in touch and, you know, kind of go from there. So thank you for coming on. Everybody like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week on Take a Pain Check.
Yay!
Keeping me